That's right. Yeah, it's cool. Welcome, Byron. Awesome. Okay. Shall we get started so we can make the most out of our wonderful panel's time? Kia ora, everyone. I'm Sav. I'm a design strategist at Aramanawa, the design and innovation studio within Auckland Hospital, or Te Tumai. Te Whatu Ora. I'll be your host today. I also co-lead the commercialization translation module for Te Toki Mataora alongside Ella, and I think Jamie's on the call as well, Jamie Adborough from the Health Tech Activator. We have three amazing panelists here who are going to probably give us some good tips and tricks about how to engage with clinicians, how to penetrate the walls of the hospital that don't want us in there, how to do it the right way, the most respectful way. We know it's really hard, but it's also really important to get clinical feedback and input, as well as patient feedback and input. But it's a very, very busy environment for all people. And you're working a lot of the time with people who are unwell. So how do you engage respectfully and ethically? And on the panel today, we have people from both within the hospital as well as the community. So what we'll spend 5 minutes, each person giving us an introduction, and we'll be starting with Dr. Helen Lunt from Canterbury.
Kia ora. Helen Lunt, toko ingoa, and I'm in Canterbury in Te Whatu Ora. So my background is as a clinician, and I don't ever pretend to be anything else. And I'm just reacting actually to Saad's comment about the hospital. Arguably at the moment, I'm predominantly outpatient based. And so I'm aware that some people, when they talk about the hospital, think about, ICU and a big building with lots of extremely sick people. But a lot of innovation might be better suited to start off in a less acute environment. So that's something that maybe we can explore going forward. And I just want to acknowledge the fact that there are quite a lot of primary care-based people on this call. So for the last 12 years, not really quite sure where this is going in 2023, I've been involved locally in, for want of a better term, tech transfer, always wearing the clinician hat, but looking at commercialization opportunities, often in a startup environment where somebody's trying to get a good idea into the health system, and maybe they don't have a clinical background, or the other way around, somebody with a clinical background, usually within the health system, is trying to scale their ideas out there and is using a commercialization methodology as a way of scaling up so that their ideas are translated. I've also got background in clinical trials and the usual academic stuff. So I think my two takeaways, as in most of life, the whole thing is about relationships, maintaining relationships, building up trust. It sounds a bit cliched, but you can't get away from the need to do that for effective long-term engagement. And the second thing I just wanted to talk about was framing what you're trying to achieve. So what I see all the time would be people from outside the health system coming in, not able to frame their ideas, concepts, needs, demands, whatever, in a way that the clinicians understand, but also the clinicians are often not particularly good because they don't have the experience of communicating with industry. So learning how to frame what you want, need, expect, behaviors, or what have you, is, I think, a skill set that we can always all work on. But I'd be very interested to hear what the other speakers have to say about that. So thank you, Kia ora.
Kia ora. Okay, thank you for that. And next we have Dr. Aniva Lawrence from Northland.
Talofalawa malo lele kakalofalahi atu kia ora na isabulavana katalohani Yeah, just I'm a Samoan GP, so thanks Helen for mentioning, there's 5,000 of us primary care providers that work out in the community and are obviously individual entities, either practice owners or under corporates or under community trusts. And so I guess I bring that perspective. I also hold a role academically with the University of Auckland at the moment in terms of supervising medical trainees coming into the Northern environment. So I've got a passion around young people. Adolescent health is where I've done a bit of research, and also I've done a bit of research around gout access, medication access and things like that. So I guess from my perspective, I was thinking about how to engage with clinical people, and particularly when you're wanting to push something into primary care. And probably a good example of that was e-prescribing, where it's very slow uptake, and then COVID made it happen overnight. And I think the things is often there's, providers talk to each other really rapidly. And so it is about the way that you pitch things. For our practice particularly, we have been a pilot site for HPV screening, and also have worked with MedTech companies around improving access for blood glucose monitoring, continuous blood glucose monitoring devices in our patient population, because we have a high Māori, high Pacifica population. So thinking about how you target populations that you perhaps has an element of improving equity in that space when you're doing research as well too. So I would say for primary care, when you're emailing, we get hundreds and hundreds a day. So it needs to stand out. It needs to have benefit for the population that we're caring for specifically. Needs to be no more than a page in terms of summarizing what you're wanting to do. Because if you send me a 10-page document, I'm not going to look at it, just with the flow through of work in primary care. So that would be my advice in that space, and hopefully we can have more discussion.
Oh my gosh, I am so guilty of sending the 10-page documents. Good tip, good tip. And finally on the panel, we have Dr. Stephen Innes from Capital and Coast.
Tēnā koutou katoa. No te tahi aho, ko apo ki te maunga, ko atakaro te awa, ko Pakeati iwi, ko Stephen Innes, tōku ingoa. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa. Thanks for having me along. I'm Stephen Innes. I do a lot of things. I was telling the guys before, I'm here at the Rutherford Clinic, which is my little endoscopy empire, as a gastroenterologist. I also work for Hutt Hospital as a gastroenterologist, mostly doing inflammatory bowel diseases work. And I work for the University of Otago in Wellington as a senior lecturer in gastroenterology. But I think the reason I'm here is because I've recently started as the medical lead for research for Te Whatu Ora, Capital Coast and Hutt Valley. And I think for you guys, it's worth understanding the sort of developmental context we're in Te Whatu Ora, scrabbling around trying to find new ways of working and new operational models, and we don't quite know what they are yet. But in research, we strongly believe that we're going to be moving to a national office, if you like, for research with regional and district based research officers conducting the work of research. So in Capital Coast and Hutt Valley, we have a pretty mature research office structure with me as the medical lead and Raul Sol Cruz as our manager. And Raul has come from a history of working for medical research institution in New Zealand, and he's a really experienced manager in the research area, and he's leading a great team of nurses and research assistants with a fully functioning clinical trials unit where we can do work right through from phase 1 through to phase 3 and even post post-marketing studies. We do that for a lot of different commercial sponsors, but also obviously for clinicians who are interested in research right across the board. We've got a lot of ties with other organizations like Medical Research Institute, like Amalgam Institute, the universities, etc. So all of that perhaps helps you to understand that there's a lot of moving parts in research in the health sector in Te Whatu Ora, and that lots of them aren't well integrated yet, but we're working towards that. But I would say locally, if you're trying to look for a way in and you don't have your own network, like Helen was saying before, it's all about relationships. So if you can form those relationships early, really good idea. If you don't have your own network, I think one of the really important ways that you can access the research machinery, if you like, of our hospitals is to look to see if your local hospital has a research office. And somebody like Raul, say in Wellington and Hutt Valley, will really help to steer you towards clinicians. And I think that the relationship that you have with a clinician is going to be the thing that gives you success. It's sort of technically impossible to do research within the hospital setting, at least without a clinician. And truly in the community, when you're talking about primary practice, you need those GP partners as well. So making those relationships is not straightforward, but the research office can help you with that. Generally, clinicians are pretty busy, like Helen and Eva have said, but that doesn't mean that they're not interested and willing. My hope is that as we develop sort of maturity within our health system to perform research, then the clinicians will be supported to do the things that you need the clinicians for, and lots of the other things that we sometimes bog them down with that surround research. Research officers and mature research systems will be able to take care of themselves. So that's where we sit in Capital Coast and Hutt Valley, and I think there is different levels of maturity of that throughout the rohe. Certainly regionally with our region, we're involved with Palmerston North, Masterton, and Hawke's Bay, and we're looking to really develop and support some of those functions across the whole region. And I'm sure other districts will be looking to support the bigger hospitals will be looking to support the other smaller hospitals in their region. So I think you'll see more and more opportunity as the research stream for Te Whatu Ora develops as a separate directorate, is the way it looks like it'll happen. So kia ora, thanks for coming along.
Kia ora. Thank you all for joining us. So already so many amazing insights. I hope you've all been scribbling down notes that I can steal from you at a later time. At this point, we can now open up to the audience. If you have any questions, please use the raise hand function, and we can pass the mic on to you. Yes, Dai.
Sorry, Sam, I couldn't find the raise hand button, so I'm raising my real hand.
It's
Trust me.
yeah, where the reactions button is. If you click on
Yeah.
that, and then
Yeah.
there's an option to raise hand.
You'd think that I should know by now, right?
It's
But
okay. Actual
hi
hands
everyone. No worries. Hi everyone. I'm Diana Siu, one of the co-leads of Te Toki Mata Ora. So, but thank you very much for being on our panel. My question actually relates around data, because there's a lot of researchers that are now accessing data from their clinical partners from the hospital. And what I really would like to know, or your views as to what's the right way of doing it, what are the what should the researchers and clinicians actually be thinking about, and who do we approach for proper sign-off?
Perhaps, Di, I can talk about what the systems we have in place at Capital Coast and Hutt Valley are. And I think that management of data, and particularly data sovereignty, is an area that we are quickly quickly sort of learning in. And there are still some holes and some difficulties. But essentially, one of the most important steps is the advice from an ethics committee. Now, that's easy when you are within scope for HDEC, and they'll give you good advice about managing data sovereignty, privacy, etc. If you are trying to do minimally invasive research, it's a little bit harder in the health setting. Some places, particularly like Auckland, have hospital-based ethics committees which can help you with that. In Capital Coast and Hutt Valley, we don't, but it's certainly something that's on our list of to-dos. And it comes from a sort of historical division where the ethics committees, because they were inundated with work, sought to take some of the lower risk stuff and push it out to what were then the DHBs, and they created this sort of scope of review. And if you sit outside that scope of review, the expectation was that the DHBs would then do the review for you, but not all the DHBs were able to sort of develop that system very quickly. The universities do, so many people, many clinicians who are doing a lot of research, like Helen and me, will access the university ethics committees, and that helps in terms of data sovereignty, data privacy, getting the right advice early on. When you then come to us in the research office asking for help with locality approval and regulatory approval, one of the steps we take is to send the application for consultation with our research advisory group Māori, who are a group of senior Māori researchers with an interest in all aspects of research, in particular data sovereignty. And sometimes because of that gap, I was talking to them yesterday, actually, it's interesting you ask now, there are issues where data sovereignty and safety aren't considered carefully enough in the minimal invasive research sort of area, and sometimes we need to do some tidying up and some work there. But I think it's a really important issue. Sometimes the clinicians may or may not have a lot of experience with managing the safety of data and data sovereignty, so you can't expect that they'll all be the same, but the research office should be able to guide and help and sort of develop systems that will keep the data safe and guide you through. But I'd be really interested to hear what Helen and Neva have got to say about their particular settings too.
Do you want to go first, Helen? Or?
I can go first, only in that I'm probably slightly adjacent to Stephen's thinking, in terms of research office and so on. So what I often see are people that are usually non-clinical going, you've got tons, zillions of data points available within the health system. There must be some sort of value in that that's not been realized yet. How do we access the data? And that's a good question. I think sometimes there's the research side of things, which is probably easier because there's not the commercialization aspect to it, but there's also accessing data for direct or indirect commercialization reasons. And I think when you start then to get into the data sovereignty conversations, it's a bit more complex. And I sit there thinking, we sound so naive and so disjointed with our conversations, but I think it's not so much our korero, it's more the fact that internationally, we're just struggling to keep up with what's possible in terms of the ethics of data sovereignty and so on. So the researchers who are not clinical might come along and say, give me your tick box, what do I have to tick off on to get access to the data? But like everything else, I think it's around relationships and clarity of what you're trying to do. And sure, you might have, say, a Māori advisory committee able to help at a research office level, but having broader conversations around what you're doing with the data, who feels as though they've got ownership of the data, and what might happen in 5-10 years' time to data, is all part of that sort of network of conversations that we need to have to protect data going forward. You know, it's a precious tahonga. We don't want to really sort of muddy the water for people going forward. So yes, we've got our kind of evolving tick box things at the research office, but it is about relationships as well. So it's slightly waffly, but I think that's where we are at the moment.
I think, you know, locally, as a region, we've taken a very te tiriti based approach in this space. And so our local ethics meetings involve kaumātua as well too, in our iwi leaders forum. And I think that's an important thing, to not take it as a tick box exercise, that data sovereignty has meaning to the people that the research is done in that space. And so oftentimes it's important to think about how you're going to present the outcomes of your research or study to those that it's involved or affected. And so that should be considered when you're presenting to the local regional groups, and you can take advice then too from it is important, I think, to have consumer representation at that level, because often the questions they ask are quite different to those of clinicians. And so and several times I've reviewed research projects where it's probably been very clinician heavy and not considered the consumer voice in that space. And so that would be just added bits in terms of what's already been said. I was thinking from a Pacifica perspective too, because I'm not sure if anyone tries to do research out into the Pacific as well too, and that needs government level buy-in as well when you're working from a Pacifica perspective into our Pacific Island communities. And there are nuances with each island nation that are culturally important to acknowledge and address, as you would with Te Tiriti or Waitangi in New Zealand, around data sovereignty and what is done with the data and how research is occurring in those spaces as well.
Thank you very much for that.
So many complexities and layers to consider. Kent.
Thank you. I've got a question more on the sort of commercial engagement side. So I'm a commercialization manager at Uni Services with the commercial arm of Auckland University. So we see a lot of projects ranging from sort of early sort of biotech, MedTech innovations, usually from the Bioengineering Institute or mechanical engineering. So a lot of them sort of lack the clinical engagement to really validate whether there's a problem being addressed, and if clinicians would be willing to sort of take up their innovations. So my question is, how would we help engineers, early entrepreneurs engage with clinicians, sort of without having to solve the whole cold calling things? How do we engage with you just so that we can get some clinical input on their innovations, and also engage with clinicians outside of their own research space, who can be a little bit biased on how useful that particular invention or innovation would be? Thanks.
Can I answer first on this one? Because I think an interesting, from a primary care perspective, the College of GPs nationally has sub-interest lists. So sometimes occasionally I'll get an email from the college which will say, we're looking at this piece of research and you've expressed interest in this particular area. So there are subgroups and you can kind of opt into that. So that's a way to engage with clinicians who might have a particular interest in a particular sub area within medicine, from a primary care perspective. The other thing is, you know, like, increasingly we should use technology more. And I think about the generation below me, and hugely, you know, one of my colleagues is a TikTok influencer, and in that space has like 130,000 followers. And so you need to think innovatively around how you reach as well too, I think, going forward in this space. So because the more people that see or connect with something, the more likely you'll get buy-in.
I can go too. So I think the answer's kind of the same as before, and Helen will probably reiterate this. If you've got a research office, go to the research office, but it's not the whole answer. I do think also look at which clinicians locally are in the university, because they're likely to have a little bit more headspace, and we'll carry that across to their hospital setting for you. But thinking more broadly, I think, I mean, I'm a physician. Obviously, I'm president of the College of Physicians, and the college itself is kind of made up of a diaspora of different subspecialities. Most of those subspecialities, much like Aniva said, with the GPs, have special societies, and those special societies have interest groups, execs and committees, and meetings. So you can go straight to the special societies. Like if we take gastroenterology as an example, you can find easily online where the gastro societies exec sits and talk with them directly. Another thing is, if you've got tech that you have developed that you want to validate, the special society meetings, and Helen, my wife's the president. Helen, my wife's Rosemary Hall, so she's the president of the New Zealand Society of Diabetes. So I know the same thing exists in Helen's world too, those meetings will often take abstracts. They don't have to be super well developed ideas. So you can bring your abstract along to a meeting and talk to the clinicians directly about your really great idea, and they'll be interested. And then you'll get a lot of different perspectives and people sort of wanting to talk to you. So that's another really good way to get your foot in that door, apart from cold calling, which works too, and using your networks, like Helen's already said. They can reach pretty widely. Like I've just said, I know Helen through my wife, and I know Helen because I've quoted her papers about body image. Helen, I mean, doing a little bit of body image work, as Rosie's been helping with. So we're all pretty connected, and if we can't help, then we can often help somebody else too. So use those networks as well. Even if you think, oh, that person's got nothing to do with this, they'll often know somebody who knows somebody and help you down the line.
Yeah, sure. I totally agree with what Aniva and Stephen have said, and it's slightly sad because I'm not predominantly a university person. I'm more in Te Whatu Ora, to agree with Stephen here that you may well find that university clinicians, these people with joint appointments, are much easier to have an initial korero with. They've got, if you like, drivers that may be more aligned to some of your biomedical engineers than the busy clinicians in Te Whatu Ora and the busy clinicians in primary care. So I think it's often important to be quite clear what you as an engineer are trying to ask the clinicians to do. You know, is it around potentially validation? Is it around just getting some market feedback? Is it around doing some co-development? And as somebody that I've got two sons who are engineers, so if I'm sounding a bit, engineers can't communicate, that's kind of, I don't know, not really what I'm trying to say, but sometimes clinicians get the feeling that it's very much technology push from the engineers. And if you can engage in an equal conversation, I think you're going to get much more traction in terms of your long-term relationships. So this concept of engineers going, I've got a great idea, my clinician colleagues are going to be super awed by it. Often, hits the road, hits the rubber, when you start to have conversations about clinical reality. And I think if your engineers are open to listening and opening to have a journey together, accepting that you're often going to talk past each other, you're going to get a better longer term result. But just reiterating what Aneva and Stephen are saying, there's plenty of ways to get your initial foot in the door with a conversation. It's what you do following that that is often a little bit more difficult and has to be sort of coming from a point of wanting to learn, humility, and working together.
Byron.
Yeah, hi everyone. I think my question somewhat intersects the two previous ones, in that it's sort of when you've got a concept that you think actually does address a clinical need, and you're looking to really validate what that's worth to the healthcare system as a whole, do you sort of see the clinician as taking you through that journey, and that I guess wider hospital data rather than patient data being something they can connect you with? Or is that something where you're kind of starting from scratch again and looking at how do I get in touch with the finance or IT teams to understand what the real decision drivers here are?
Well, I'm quite happy to lead if you're okay with that, Neva and Stephen. I've just got in front of me at the moment a Te Whatu Ora business case template, which I'm filling out for somebody else. And I think you're absolutely right that your average clinician is going to be focused on the clinical stuff, and you're often needing to come up with your if you like, business case validation, and how you do that. I don't think there's always a particular, sort of, again, template to do it. Is going to require much more than clinician input. So it might be you want information from the purchasing team, you might want information from HR around the value of releasing staff time, etc. So I just fully agree with what you're saying. The clinician is going to give you one perspective, but usually they are not the purchaser. You need to work out who your purchaser is very early on and look at shaping your idea around the potential purchaser.
I think access to the information that will allow you to see what the value proposition is one thing, but then being able to put that together in a sensible way is a much more difficult task. And I think our maturity in health research and Aotearoa around health economics, it hasn't been great. And there are a number of projects that I've been involved on where good health and economics input would have made a big difference, but it's been hard to achieve because we just haven't had the health economists built into the system. We haven't had access one. So I think that there's a real need as we develop a more mature research system within health in Aotearoa for us to think about that as one of the sort of tenets, as well as things like ethics, data sovereignty, te tiriti, and consultation with mana whenua. So it doesn't help answer your question, but I do think it's on the radar, and I do think we'll see a movement in that direction. One of the things that we believe, the royal we, is that as we develop a more mature research system, we may have to start triaging and think carefully about health outcomes from research, because we just kind of do what takes our fancy at the minute, largely. And if we start triaging and things, then the value proposition of a new idea is going to become one of the real needs in terms of getting through the door, again, back to that first principle. So I would say if you're building ideas, if you're making teams that build ideas that could have application in health, then thinking very early on about what health economics support you have that you might be able to draw up those cases for, particularly when it comes to business cases for research within Te Whatu Ora as that develops. The other thing that's a little bit frustrating in New Zealand is often the most simple ideas that you would have thought we had an answer to from public health information. We just don't have it. It's just like, I don't know. And I think there's a real need for us to drive forward in collecting some of that information, joining up systems like Helen's talked about before. There's often multiple systems holding information and they just don't talk to each other. And we need to keep building systems, but those are to-do jobs for us in Te Whatu Ora, but all of them will help answer the question that you're asking. More problems than solutions, but at least I guess they're on the radar.
Thank you.
I think reflectively, and I don't know if this is a slightly different perspective as well too, is that again, like I was watching a documentary of a whole lot of women that are currently trying to sue Bayer around the issue of contraceptive device in Australia, and I think that's a reflection of clinicians feeling that they gotten it right and they actually got it quite wrong. And so, you know, ultimately, sometimes we learn these in retrospective ways, but you can sometimes prevent too from the way that you do your research in the first place, and having, again, that user feedback from the beginning in order to inform either improvements or something that's not going to be successful.
For anyone that's interested, I've popped a link in the chat to a health economics workshop that's coming up May 23rd at Callaghan Innovation. I did the pilot and it was incredible. Would highly recommend. It was, yeah, would recommend it to anyone actually who works in the space, regardless of whether you're developing medical technologies, doing research, or clinician. Anna F, I can see that you've added quite a few comments. I was wondering if you would like to ask any of the panel, just to make sure that I haven't misinterpreted anything.
I mean, I think Anna's right in her last. Are you there, Anna? There's a bit of feedback, sorry. I don't want to talk over you, but she is completely right. You know, the mental health system is a system that no one can see, and it delays transfer of information. It's a very slow system, so there are safety issues in that space as well too. And it is a system was defunct like 5 years ago, but has still not, no one's, you know, signed on the bottom line to change it instinctively across this country. So yeah, I think Te Whatu Ora does have a lot of work to do in the next couple of years in the IT space specifically, because often your data management has lots of patient safety issues as well.
Thank you for that. Yeah, it was a shock coming into Te Toka Tūmai anyway. I know Waitemata are further ahead, realizing that a lot of data isn't actually centralized, and we're kind of still depending on paper-based things that get scanned and stored somewhere, which makes it, yeah, hard to move data around and make use of it, or good use of it. Any further questions from anyone? Because I have one, if no one else wants to go. I was just wondering, and maybe you could go one panel member at a time. Can you share a story of like a time where clinical engagement went well, and maybe well or not so well? You can share. You can choose one or the other. And maybe we can kind of learn through a narrative.
Can I clarify, is that in the research space specifically?
Yeah, or it could even be like maybe have startup reached out to you. Oh, sorry, weird feedback. And there's been a successful engagement. I guess anything around medical technology and getting clinician and end user collaboration. Yeah, Helen.
Well, I can talk about something in my own space, just so that I'm not sort of treading on other people's toes confidentiality-wise. And this was a local medical device company that's got fantastic reputation overseas. and needed to have be seen to have some local engagement with us. And the conversation was always around, for me anyway, what is it, your device is brilliant. The problem is, as a clinician, I'm not the purchaser. Somebody else is a purchaser in Te Whatu Ora. And it was around, why did this company want to engage with us? So, keep on going back. What is it that you're wanting out of us as somebody that's geographically close to you? And it was often around accessing clinicians to have a look at validation of new technology just in a half-day workshop, or it was around writing a report about the safety of their device following a certain framework. But it was never clear, unless I asked that question, what they were after as to kind of why they wanted to engage. So again, it's just trying to work out what everybody's bringing to the table and valuing it in a way that means that there's not one person sort of dominating the conversation. And then for me, it was about sustainability of that relationship in terms of moving into Te Whatu Ora and trying to put this device in a sort of business as usual framework with the IT department and with the purchasing department and all that kind of stuff. So these relationships take a lot of nurturing for what seems to be very little visible output. And I haven't seen any other relationship be any different to this. You've got to put a lot of work into it.
What made the relationship good? What made it work?
The device was quite incredible, and what also made it work was our what was then CDHB IT department that got some, we were talking about data not speaking to each other and so on, got some fundamental integration right in a way that I've not seen internationally. So a lot of it, unfortunately, is about the right person at the right time being available. But if you're scanning to see what opportunities are out there in terms of tweaking some relationship, often something comes up somewhere.
Thank you. Stephen.
I think perhaps you'll start seeing a theme. And I guess one of the examples that I can think of is where perhaps the IP wasn't as amazing as what Helen was dealing with, but where an organization really had no history of clinical research whatsoever, but wanted to grow into that space. And, it's kind of like rip and bust. I want to do a clinical trial now. and just developing that understanding that, anything's possible, but it kind of does take time to develop the systems that you need to do it and the people in the place. And so what we've done with that is we've grown by sort of using me as a vehicle, really as a PI, to make the early clinical trials safe and operated at sort of a phase 1 level, but then building around that an educational program that brings in science and medical graduates to do PhDs, so you can really build that depth and connection. So we're talking, multi-year sort of developmental relationships, but then allows us to start leveraging through those people their positions within hospital research organizations as well, tracked funding through the research offices in the hospital, which we're not typically very good at. So working on that, so the money flows into the clinical organizations as well as out to the external research organizations, and allows the maturity within the healthcare system to then go on and move up through the phases of research. You need good partners, but the partner alone isn't enough if you haven't got the people, and it's always a person power equation that you're dealing with. We've already touched on that. So yeah, really having a longitudinal view, and that's where organizations, institutions can perhaps look to build the infrastructure which will allow their aspiring developers to have access without having to go through that multi-year process themselves. And we do that backwards. I spent a lot of time building up my relationships with marae locally so that we can build their research capability, so that perhaps one day, if our agenda aligns, if their ideas and what I'm doing in my research are aligned, that I can help them to do the research they want to do. And that's generational almost, because you've got to find the researchers coming up through to fill the ranks, and you can't just bring them in from outside. It's not like we can go out with massive budgets for research officers, and compete with international organizations within Hauora Māori or institutions in New Zealand, for example. So really long-term trajectories, and I think it's institution to institution that's going to make that work. And then we as individual researchers and developers should be able to tap into that. That's what success is going to look like.
Thanks, Stephen. Neva, do you have any stories to share with us?
I was just thinking maybe around, so mine's slightly different, I guess, in something that's established but maybe not accessible. And so I was thinking about the relationship that was formed for us to get continuous blood glucose monitoring, and one of our lead nurses who does regular diabetes clinics is the person that leveraged this with the company that was promoting a free trial type arrangement. But actually from a clinical perspective, we know that cost access is a real barrier for our high needs communities. And so the way that we looked at it was to, and I know that the nurse kind of sat down and made a plan of how she would kind of utilize that within her clinics going forward, and really took a focus on those that were most uncontrolled, and implementing with regular follow-ups when they had the free trial of continuous glucose monitoring to get biggest bang for buck, so that she could actually see the tangible change in terms of reducing blood sugar levels in an easy way over a shortish period of time, and so that it could give that feedback to the patient as well too, that actually they could see that more regularly for themselves in that shorter space of time, that it is doable. So it was more not a tool of something potentially that patient's going to be able to afford long term, but a tool to help them visualize what their sugars are on a day-to-day basis, from an HbA1c of 90 down to like 70 over the period of time, so that actually tangibly they can see the change. So yeah, just thinking about linking with the clinicians who are at the front line once the device is ready for rollout, and thinking how can you equitably distribute that to improve some of the inequities that we see across the country in Aotearoa at the moment.
Very cool. Thank you so much. Okay, we have 7 minutes left. Any burning questions? Speak now, or forever hold your peace. Yes, go for it.
Hi, I'm sorry, I'm really late to this because I had a meeting run over time. And I'm a researcher, but I work with a lot of clinicians, and they're so busy, and sometimes I feel bad adding anything else to the workload. But I'm wondering from your perspective, and you might have covered this, I apologize if you have, what's the benefit for you as a clinician to engage with researchers and being involved in that space? Is there anything, does it change your practice, or does it make, yeah, I'm just wondering, and I'm really sorry if you've covered that already, but if you wouldn't mind, I've always been interested to hear that from people I don't work with.
Well, I'm quite happy to start if that's okay. So I think, Silke, that is an absolutely excellent and fundamental question. And I would love it if more researchers asked the clinicians that they want to engage with what the clinicians think they're getting out of that dialogue, because it then just matures your relationship in a very positive way. I think it depends, and this is probably just a personal perspective, on exactly what the value proposition is that the research is bringing to the table. And hopefully they're bringing it to the table kind of quite honestly. So we'll get people going, oh, well, this is your opportunity as a clinician to have input into device development. And sometimes you go, well, that sounds nice, but am I really being heard as a clinician when I'm giving the input? So I think that story is sometimes a little bit oversold. Sometimes for me, it's just about getting me up to speed with some new sort of research ideas, some new technology. You know, it's always nice to see what's cool and new on the horizon from, if you like, a practitioner in that research space. It would be very nice if I said, oh, it's about equity and making change to the lives of the patient, but we do recognize that it's often 5 or 10 years down the track, if things are going well, before there's implementation of that research idea into practice. I think with the chat, we've been discussing how long and late it takes to actually get research ideas into the best practice implementation phase. So I think it depends on the research question, it depends on the researcher, but please keep on asking that question.
Thank you so much.
I think I think Helen's covered it. I think it does need to be a relationship and not a transaction, but in the first instance, to attract attention, you have to understand a little bit about the clinician that you're dealing with and what transactionally is valuable to them if you want to get your foot in the door, and develop things from there. And I think some of the things that drive us apart from personality and restlessness to do new things revolve around a desire to change things for our patients, a need to complete some activities. For example, if we work for the university, you know, many of you will as well, so you know what the pressures are there. So if you've got a clinician working for a university, you can understand what they might need. But clinicians within the hospitals have professional development needs as well. So thinking about how what you're doing might fit within that space, and it can be quite simple. Like you need to get to find out what the value proposition for your IP is, and they need to figure out where the holes in their service are, and together you can work to just answer the question, which can become exactly the same thing. So you know, sort of understanding what clinicians do apart from just see patients and what their needs are in terms of their professional development and other professional activities can help you to see what the levers to interest them in things are, which is very transactional, but I guess at the start of it, that gives you a way to attract their attention.
Yeah, yeah, that's roughly what I thought it would be. So yeah, thank you for that.
I'm not sure if you were here, Silke, before. Someone touched briefly on building resource, Māori research capability resource. So you may have young ones that don't have the experience, but actually if you invest in growing that capacity within your team, actually that's got real long-term benefits in this space. So I think Stephen was talking about creating long-term links, relationships with local marae or iwi hapu, and having pipelines for involvement in research as well too. So
thank you. I'm just writing down what you're saying. That's well a bit slow. Thank you.
I think the reason it's important is because, and I've experienced this as a minority population, and this is probably right for minority populations around the world as well too, often perspective is different on things. So often having those people as members or part of the team can give a different perspective in that space.
Yes, Helen.
Silky, this is something that we covered earlier, and I think Aniva's just sort of reminded me of it. Everybody sort of seems to go, oh, I must find a clinician in the hospital to help me with my research. But looking much more diversely and widely, I mean, you know, I'm not necessarily coming at things from a cultural perspective, but actually perhaps going to the consumers. And I'm from Te Whatu Ora, so probably shouldn't be saying this, but also going to the private providers is another way of getting that broader perspective. And you may find that the busy clinicians weren't actually the place to start. It was a much more broader community who was able to help you get your ideas sort of, you know, a little bit more mature, and the clinicians came in later.
Yeah, that was definitely my experience when I was going through this process many moons ago. We went out into the community and probably spent a good year focusing just on building relationships, and then that kind of spread out. Word got around, and yeah, I can't stress enough the importance of prioritizing relationships and actually taking the time to develop them. It is, for me, the biggest takeaway from today. We are at time. I wanted to thank you all for your time today. Thank you, Aniva, if you wanted to dip out. Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Stephen. It has been incredibly insightful. We know you're very busy people, so we are infinitely grateful for your amazing insights with us today, and we hope to continue our connection and relationship with you. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon. Akita anō.